I want to welcome everyone to this latest episode of A Williams Life. Today we're talking with Polly Wood-Holland, who's had a career, I think it's fair to say, unlike any other member of our class. For who among us has fabricated mechanical wolves that terrorize New Yorkers, or worked on an updated version of the iconic Tin Man costume for the movie The Wiz, or developed colorful, vibrant interiors to bring to life the 1950s and 60s for a successful television series? Polly did all this and more, working as an artist and designer on a wide range of feature films, TV, and theater productions. Her many film credits include Wolfen and The Wiz, which I just alluded to, as well as The Verdict, Arthur, and The Dictator. On Broadway, she worked on mega productions such as The Lion King, Phantom of the Opera, Spamalot, Color Purple, South Pacific, and Billy Elliot, just to name a few. In addition to her professional work, we'll also talk to Polly about her association with such legendary figures as Paul Newman and Mike Nichols. So, Polly, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. It's been quite a journey, and we'll get to your work in entertainment in a moment, but we usually start at Williams, and that's where we'll start now. It wouldn't seem the logical choice for someone interested in the hustle and bustle of Broadway, TV, and film. So how did you end up going to the college?
Originally, it wasn't my idea to work in film and TV and movies. I chose Williams because it was small. I had gone to a very large high school of 3,000 students, and, it was a good school, and it had a very good reputation for the art history, which I was interested in and thought, honestly, that's what I thought I might go into. So I went for that reason. And it was also a little interesting to be the first class of women. So that's why I chose Williams and, was lucky to get in.
Did you know when you arrived on campus that theater would be such a major part of your college life? Did you know that coming in?
No, I didn't. I always enjoyed performing and growing up. Town productions, high school productions. I really enjoyed that. So I did head to the freshman review right away. And it was a place where I knew I could make friends. And, it just was something I want, for fun.
We'll talk a little bit more about how the Frosh Review helped launch your theater career.
So that was actually pretty funny. I had always also been interested and involved in art. And we were sitting at rehearsal, and I walked up to the upperclassman who was basically one of the producers of the show. And I said to him, do you think you might need some help painting the scenery? And he turned around and he looked at me and he said, "You paint scenery?"
I need that, right?
And I said, "Well, no, but I probably could." And it ended up that I painted a full stage drop and most of the scenery for the show, just trying it out.
Had you done anything like that before?
No, not to that scale. I'd never used a paint frame. Williams used to have a paint frame for drops. No, I never had. And he just landed it in my lap, and I thought, all right. And then from there, I spent most of the 4 years being in shows, which I really enjoyed, and thought I might want to be an actress, but also working on shows, doing behind the scenes painting and, anything I could do to help. And then after 4 years, it really became obvious that maybe I didn't really want to be an actress because it's such a subjective life, and I didn't want people to be judging me that way. And I could paint. And I thought, really what is going to be easier for you? And that's to be judged on my painting, not on my appearance.
Were you torn between performing and set design?
Oh, yes. Yes, I did one season of summer stock, and I didn't tell anybody I could paint, just for fun. But the reality is I was very young looking, very blonde, and, would have been cast as brainless blonde females. And I thought, no, that's not going to work for me.
There was no theater major back then, so you had to learn, and we talked previously about this, by the seat of your pants. And I'm wondering, was that a good way to learn? And was that helpful both at Williams and for the rest of your career?
I think that it was good because some small schools don't necessarily have theater programs with a lot of depth. So the training that you get for a professional theatrical life may not be that good. And it was better to take advantage of what Williams had to offer, which was an amazing art history department, which has stood me in good stead. So I actually think it was better to do it the way I did it.
Your senior year, Bernie Buckey took over and transformed the theater department at Williams, and I wonder what impact that had for you at the time and later, immediately afterwards, because I know you worked with them afterwards as well.
Right. At the time, we weren't all that thrilled because the students had really had free rein, and because we had latitude, Cap and Bells could do things like deficit finance a show, reach out and hire professional designers, directors, choreographers to come in, which was really invaluable training. The minute Bernie came in, and fairly, he took over that. And it's a college, so, the sort of standard musical fare once a year went out the window.
Yeah.
So there was a little push and pull there. And but then 2 years later, he reached out and hired me to come design a show, which, thinking about it now, I don't know whether he was issuing a challenge or because I'm surprised that he took that chance.
And you came back to Williams to do
I
that.
did.
And what were the shows that you worked on?
Well, first I came back and I did Guys and Dolls, which was the only musical Bernie would really do because it was based on Damon Runyon. So there was some heft to it. Mm-hmm. And knowing him as I did, I designed the most Brechtian production that I could come up with. And he loved it, sort of inspired by clay and kind of dark blue hues and whatnot. So it was great. But it's a big show.
Yeah.
It has a lot of scenery.
And you did that for a couple of years, right? The various shows that you worked on for him.
I did that, and then I think there was a 2-year gap, and he had me back. There again, another big challenge to do Under Milkwood and The Misanthrope in repertory.
Right.
Which, considering they are such different plays, was difficult. Because the scenery had to swap out every night.
Now, you referred earlier to the attraction of Williams as being the first class of women who attended for a full 4 years. What was that experience like for you?
I think I thought it would just be fun. And it was more challenging because the college had to shift from being the all-male school to a co-ed school. And there were some growing pains there. I do think that Williams did it as well as could be done because they just 4 years, full class of women. I know there were a few before, but basically they jumped in with both feet.
Right.
They had facilities and they had, so that it really only took about 4 years for that transition. But it did leave some of us feeling a little, I think, isolated, especially freshman year.
I wonder if you could build on that, because when I've talked to other women as part of these interviews and otherwise, they've referred to it, in their words, as an unsettling experience. Either they felt alone or isolated or not entirely accepted by their male classmates. Was any of that part of your experience?
It was, but I think that's also why I made the theater my home, because that was not true in the theater. I was welcomed, and in fact, I got better parts than I would have because there weren't upper-class women to take them, or very many. As far as the rest of the school goes, yeah, because, there was the men used to invite women from other colleges on the weekends, and that was very awkward.
Yeah.
To have a whole bunch of women come in from various places and kind of, give you the eye.
So you felt a little bit like a second-class citizen? Maybe?
Yeah, a little bit. It was like, hey,
we're here.
Yeah. But it really didn't last. I think they did a pretty good job.
So soon after you graduated, and I know you worked for Bernie Bucky for a period of time, but in those early years, you were introduced to Tony Walton, a Tony Award-winning set designer who became an important influence for you, an important mentor. And I wonder if you could talk about the influence he had on you and what you learned from Tony.
Oh, it was there we get into the area of the serendipity. I had the senior year at Williams, we had done our musical was Beggar's Opera, chosen by Bernie.
Right.
And there was an outside set designer hired, a woman named Marge Kellogg. And since I was president of Captain Bell's at the time, it was my job to get the contract signed. We went to lunch, and I told her I might like to be a set designer. And she said, well, you know, when you come to the city, why don't you call me? And I had thought, well, she's a kind of a mid-range designer. That sounds great. So I called her as I was about to come, and she said, I really don't have any work. But I'll tell you what, you call Ming-Cho Lee and Tony Walton. Now, I was so green that I knew who Ming-Cho Lee was, who was one of the top designers on Broadway. And I thought, I don't think so. I have no training. But I did not know that Tony Walton was the other top designer on Broadway. So I called him. And
you could be fearless because you didn't know who he was.
I didn't know who he was. So I go to have the interview, and I lay out my sort of pathetic range of drawings. And I admit to him that I am not trained, really, that I've done things by the seat of my pants. And we had a nice discussion, and he said, well, all I really have is a research job. And I said, that would be great. I will do anything. And I tend to learn quickly. So I went home, and he hired me. And it wasn't until I started working the next week that I realized who I was working for. And I was astounded. I thought, oh, my. And that's where I learned at his studio. I learned so much. Tony was he sort of expected things to be done a certain way, and he taught us that. He had really lovely assistants. I learned how to draft. I learned how to make models. I kind of pushed for that. I would say, gee, I think I can do that. And watched him. And it was amazing. And I guess he thought there was potential because he kept me around and gave me projects. And
do you think he saw something in you that maybe you didn't even see it yourself at the time?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. When I think back and I think of the things that he trusted me with, even as an assistant, I'm amazed. I think how did that, how did he think that would work out? And it did. But no. And at the time it was just, okay, Tony wants you to do this. I'm going to do that.
Wow. Let's dive into one of the projects you worked on with Tony, and one of them was the 1978 movie The Wiz, starring Michael Jackson and Diana Ross and a host of other major stars, and Quincy Jones was the music producer. So you're fresh out of Williams. You're still in your early to mid-20s. Was this at all intimidating working for these major stars on this major movie?
It was. So I had decided, I'd worked for Tony for about 2 years, and I had decided watching him that the life of a Broadway designer was not for me. The time that he needed to spend to do his projects was overwhelming. And so I took a scene painting class to just learn the techniques. And then you had to take an exam to get into the union as a scenic artist. They gave the exam once a year. I think 120 people signed up, and there were various parts to it. And in the end, they passed 7. And luckily, I was one of the 7 people. Just in time, Tony was going to go start on The Wiz, start in the actual studio. I had helped with some models and things to start with. Just in time for me to join a crew on The Wiz with Ian Sprott doing special projects for the movie, including the Tin Man costume. So he sort of handed me off to Ian, who was an extraordinarily talented craftsman and prop maker from Canada. And that's where I learned their mold making and casting and, all the different things I needed to do.
We're going to return to Ian in a second.
Right.
But first, I want to delve into one of those projects, which is really fascinating, is your development of the Tin Man costume. Because as I understand it, this costume, which was designed for Nipsey Russell, contained 165 separate molded pieces. Now, I remember the original Tin Man, which seemed to me pretty simple, and this was anything but simple. So how did you go about designing that new costume?
Well, so you have to remember that Tony is the designer. So the first thing he does was to do a rendering. And then for a movie like that, there's even what you call a maquette, which is a small, it was a model of Nipsey in the costume, so you could really see it. Then that went to Ian, who thought about the different parts. Then we worked with Ian, I and maybe one other person, to produce all these things, to make all the different items and do the molding and casting, to paint. There were tin cans, and I put that in quotes, around the feet, which were some metal rims with cloth that was hand-painted to match a label. It was very complicated. And it was, the original costume, my understanding is it weighed quite a bit, like maybe 90 pounds.
The original one in the original movie.
One. Wow. Nipsey's costume only weighed about 40 pounds, and had full range of motion. I mean, it was really quite a remarkable feat, although he complained bitterly about it the entire time.
Well, I remember, I think he, at one point after they used the old oil can to loosen the parts, he gets up and does a dance routine. So it was that flexible.
It was great. But it did have so many pieces that I often went to set with Nipsey because if something fell off, I knew where it went. I was so familiar with it. And no one else, I think, really did.
Did you ever have any malfunctions where they were shooting that you had to repair because it's such a complicated costume?
No, it's just gluing things back on. Poor Nipsey, approaching him with a hot glue gun, saying, "Just hold still, sir."
Well, no wonder he found it less than uncomfortable at times.
Right. No, things were made very well at Ian's. I don't know that I remember anything. We made the silver slippers. We made crystals. We made large-scale cameras and video equipment. I don't remember anything ever breaking. I really don't.
Wow. You told me earlier that what you referred to as an insert shot that occurred during the filming of The Wiz. So tell us about the insert shot and what it was.
Oh, that was so much fun. So an insert shot is a shot of a small detail that helps the story along. And that's, in most movies have them. Someone might be talking about a fancy watch, and you'll get a close-up of a fancy watch on a man's wrist. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't have to involve the actual actor. It can just be filmed later and inserted. That's the name. So when we were doing the part where the witch tries to grab Dorothy's silver shoes and her hand curls up backwards, we had made a fake hand in the shape of a glove with all the rings and all the... And then they said, "Oh, you made it. Why don't you come do the shot?" And I said, "Okay, that sounds like fun." So
you're an actress again.
Yeah, I actually got paid for a day of extra work. And I had the clapper and Sidney Lumet going action. And it was great. It was fun. So if you watch that movie, that moment where the Eveline's hand curls up backwards, that's actually me.
Okay. Now
inside the glove.
I will always look at that scene now and remember.
Right.
Let me switch to a slightly different subject, but related. Is through Tony, you found yourself working with legendary film and theater director Mike Nichols, who you've described as brilliant and a perfectionist. So can you tell me about a project you worked on with Mike Nichols and what he was like to work with? He's obviously considered, as I said, a genius in his field.
He was such an impressive man. He was a friend of Tony's and did a lot of projects with Tony. And at one point, he was doing a show down at the Public Theater called Drinks Before Dinner. And it was a script by Edgar Doctorow, and Joe Papp, had his eye on it. I think they had ideas that it could go somewhere. Christopher Plummer was in it. It was a big deal. But it was at the public, so it wasn't union. And I, at the time, I was never a union assistant. So Tony was doing other things. He was busy. So he sent me down to the public theater to supervise everything that was going on and to make everybody happy. Shop for props, see what the set's doing, talk to the carpenter, do all of that, and even I sat in on rehearsals, which was really an incredible experience, because listening to Mike Nichols and Edgar Doctorow discuss a scene was extraordinary. They're so smart. I think too smart. The show actually wasn't very good, but there you are. And Mike, yes, he was a perfectionist, but he was fair. I used to sometimes gauge people by how they treated me, because I was no one they needed to impress. And Mike was always very respectful and, friendly as he needed to be. And also doing that project, he used to really hate things half done. So in that time when the set is, close the door and the set shakes, he would turn around and glare at me. And I would say, my 23-year-old self, I would say, "It's going to be okay, Mike. Don't look at it now." And he would believe me and turn around. And I think about that now and I think, good grief.
You mentioned Sidney Lumet and all these other people you worked with. We're only at the beginning of your career, but were there times when you almost pinched yourself?
Oh.
That you would say, "What am I doing here among these amazing people?"
Oh. Yeah. And working at Tony's was like that, because he was so good at what he did and he had so many connections. I can remember coming to work at the studio one morning and, wafting into the kitchen to get my coffee, and there's Julie Christie sitting at the kitchen table. And, I can't even speak. I'm so impressed, I don't even know what to say. And that was true working for him.
We'll talk about another project now. Early in your career, the 1981 movie Wolfen. It starred Albert Finney and Gregory Hines. And in the film, you create these terrifying, lifelike mechanical wolves, which frankly scared the heck out of me. And I'm wondering what were the challenges you faced creating these creatures and how you overcame those challenges.
So that was Wolfen. That was not Tony did not design that. I'm trying to remember I don't remember who the production designer was, but that was done at Ian's studio. And then as we did at Ian's, there was a deep dive into research. We went to the Museum of Natural History and had a conference and a meeting with the taxidermy guy. And he told us all about how to prepare things and stitch things and, different ways to do that. We listened to, there was a record that Robert Redford narrated about wolves. So while we were working, we would listen to
Inspiration.
Robert Redford talk about wolves. Because it was very complicated. There was the fiberglass body, and then Ian would fabricate all the mechanics. He was very gifted that way. And my job, usually with Ian, was the surface treatments. So I handled skins and painted things and sewed on skins, and then also worked on body parts, painting realistic skin and blood and guts and all of that. And I also did a marionette figure because somebody gets his head bitten off late in the movie. And it was great fun. It was excellent.
Oh, it sounds like it.
Oh, it was terrific.
Let's dive into a little bit more of the details of that, because practical effects, I'm going to call them practical effects, like the physical objects you designed for the wolf. And by the way, there'll be a picture on the website of you with one of these wolves so people can look at that. That those practical effects may be sort of a lost art now because so much of special effects is digital. So I'm wondering what was either lost or gained in this move from practical to digital effects.
I do see, though, that there are, a lot of animated creatures that people are still making. And essentially that's what we did. We made animated creatures for the film. I think the beauty of it is it gives the actor something to react to, which you don't get if you just plug in CGI later.
Right.
I think that's really the best part of that is the ambiance and the scenery and the setting just help the entire production. I know CGI, they use a lot of... When I first started on The Wiz, there was a matte painter. I don't know if you know what...
No, go ahead, explain.
So now they do CGI. So if you have a set outside and you need a different background, you can plug that in the computer. It used to be in old Hollywood days that they might build a set 2 stories high, and then rather than try and keep building, a fellow would come in, they'd set the camera and get it angled just so and keep that. And a fellow would come in and paint the rest of the set on glass and then put it in front of, at a certain distance from the camera, so scenes would be shot through this glass painting. And some people were amazing at it. And that's how you got Rome, for or the things that you needed. And for The Wiz, we had one of the premier, Albert Whitlock, one of the premier matte painters who was older and still doing that. Painted anything you probably see almost in the top half of the screen if you're looking at a long shot.
When you presented an actor with what you'd actually created in terms of a wolf, were any of them sort of react to that or blown away by that? Or what was the reaction?
I wasn't there for the wolves. Usually my work was offset and the wolves. But I do remember actually a funny story. We were working on we were working on Zelig for Woody Allen. And one of the things I made was fake feet. Because there's a scene where you see him with all these hospital testing devices. The idea was the scene he's on a stretcher and his feet are upside down because he's kind of a chameleon. And so I made these fake feet, and they had a little bicycle so that the toes would, there was a little bicycle armature in there, and you could do that and the toes would wiggle. And he's a small man, so I just used my casts of my feet and legs and just put some curly hair all over them. And we brought those in to set, and I was there that day. And he looked at them and he said, "Oh, I don't know. I don't know about those. Those are too strange." They did, in fact, use them, but especially without anybody, set in there, because he was sitting there and his real feet would drop down and there would be a hospital.
Well, just so you know, on the website and for our listeners, there'll be a picture of those feet that people can see them.
The feet. So that was one of the reactions I was around for.
So I just want to return very briefly to the role of mentors, because you've mentioned 3 of them so far. It was Tony and Bernie and Ian. And I wondered, did they all teach you similar skills, or in terms of their mentorship, did they give you something that was different from somebody else?
Oh, I think it was different. And Bernie, honestly, I think Bernie was a mentor to many people, but I met him too late. So he was more of almost a challenger. He hired me for these challenging projects. As far as mentors go, Tony and Ian were certainly very important in my life, and they were very different. Tony knew exactly what he wanted, always. And it was your job to do it that way. And if you weren't sure what was needed, you asked a question. Because he always, you tried to inhabit his mind in terms of, and follow his instructions completely. And so from him I learned attention to detail and effort and persistence, and and also he was an amazing artist. He's an amazing creative person. Ian, on the other hand, it took me a while to adjust, because Ian wanted you to go off and figure it out by yourself. Yeah. I would, when I got to Ian's, I would be, well, how do you want this? And he would say, just go do it. Just
come back in a week and show me.
Just go figure it out. So that was kind of a different take on things.
Which was better for you? Which approach was better?
Oh, I think both. I think both. The value in both. I enjoyed trying to figure things. I do, to this day, enjoy puzzles of making art work in a certain way. I prefer that to just a two-dimensional, say, canvas or drop. I very much enjoy the marriage between something that needs to work and something that needs to look a certain way.
It sounds like the challenges that were presented by these mentors early in your career made you much better.
Oh.
Because otherwise, if you'd just been cruising through, you wouldn't have learned as much.
No. Yeah, they were, it was really an extraordinary experience with both of them.
So, Polly, our lives and careers take many interesting twists and turns, and around 1990, yours took you to Vermont from New York. And I'm wondering why you made that decision.
Well, we had just a few years before, we had our first child, and he unfortunately died at a month old. And I have to say that threw us into a kind of a tailspin. I insisted, my ex wanted to run away immediately and leave New York. I insisted on staying a little bit while I had two children safely. I was concerned about that. But then I also didn't know how to raise children in New York City. I wasn't a city person. So we had family. I had roots in Vermont, and we moved. We just picked up and moved to Shelburne, Vermont.
Well, I know that in that move, you had many opportunities to continue your practice and leveraging your art history degree, and part of that involves starting your own business. And I think it was a mural business. So tell us about that.
Yeah, I needed to do something. I can't just sit around, never could. So I started a mural business, but also anything. I did logos. I created logos. I made mascot costumes. I did a giant orange sturgeon for the Lake Champlain Basin Science Center. I had two recycling bread and puppets, Natasha, the Gypsy Queen of Recycling, and Snidely Wasteful. And the woman who was the director of Shelburne Museum caught wind of me. And I went, I don't remember what project it was, and we started a really nice relationship because she, as it happens, her father had been a scenic artist in New York in the 50s, a scenic artist and designer. So she knew exactly the kind of skills I had and what I could do for her.
So more serendipity.
More serendipity. So I made floats, and I created banners, and I re-wood grained the captain's quarters on the Ticonderoga. And I did almost anything that their own painters, which were more just surfaces, could do. I recreated stencil rooms. And some of it did entail some research. And even at one point I was working on a room in the stencil house, and it occurred to me that these buildings had been brought in the 50s by a woman named Electra Havemeyer Webb and put up fairly quickly in haste. And when I saw this room, I thought, this is not right. The way there's some placement that's not right. So I went to the museum and I said, I really don't think this is right. And they said, well, because they knew I had the degree, and they said, okay, if you write a paper that we can file away, you can change it, which I did.
So you've created a new life in Vermont and a new kind of work. Were you missing what was going on in New York? Did you still have any connections to that world?
I missed it a little bit, and at one point, somebody came in with a movie and they needed extra help. I went to help with a movie called Me, Myself, and Irene. And in doing so, met the gentleman who later was to hire me for Maisel.
Right.
So, there really is all these connections that occur. That's kind of great. But no, I was very happy in Vermont, frankly.
This is slightly separate from Vermont, but when we were preparing for this interview, you sent me a commencement address by a comedian named Tim Minchin. And instead of talking about the importance of big dreams and that kind of stuff, he talks about life in terms of luck, short-term goals, and a word we've used in this interview, serendipity. So I wonder what you took away from that commencement address, which was so important to you, and why does that message ring true?
I think when I first heard that speech, it was after I had come back to New York, and it just struck me as the way my life had gone and that it had worked well, and that I believed what he said, that if you plan on something and devote all your energies and then you get to the end of your working career and find that it wasn't what you thought, and that the role of luck and serendipity is important. And it's certainly how my life has gone. So it just struck me as how things went for me, and I really thought it was an excellent speech.
And you still live your life according to that.
I do. I do.
Okay, you've spent time in Vermont, and you're going to return to New York next. And there are a whole bunch of projects that you you tackle. Before we get to those projects, why did you return to New York?
My ex had been an actor, was a sports agent in Vermont, and then decided that he absolutely had to return to New York, that nothing would do. And I reluctantly moved us all. I wasn't honestly happy about it. But we moved back, and it became apparent that I needed to bring money in again, because New York is expensive. So Hudson Scenic Studio was not far, and it had good hours because my children they were all in school.
Well, despite your reluctance, I know you worked on many interesting projects from that period on, and one of them that caught my eye was a project in which you developed a 40 by 60-foot sculpted bas-relief for Kanye West's performance at Coachella. So I have to ask you about that.
That was marvelous. I was very complimented to be asked to be on that project because it was huge, and it was also there was a very short deadline. And a woman that I knew and had worked with called up, who was running the project, and said, "Will you come be a sculptor? Will you come help with this?" And I said yes. And we had 2 weeks. It had been started. Styrofoam had been glued up, and it was all ready to be carved. And there were 4 main sculptors on it. We each kind of had a figure. And it was great. It was so much fun. I don't know. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And it was quite a project, beautifully engineered by a shop in Newburgh called PRG. The way the pieces, the panels, we had to kind of sculpt it in panels. And the way they all went together to create this huge bas-relief was really quite extraordinary. When we finished carving it, another fellow came in and essentially fiberglassed it, because it had to go on tour.
Did you have any interaction with Kanye West?
Oh, no.
Oh, okay.
The only thing that was sort of funny is we got the word, we were about halfway through, and we got the word that Kanye wanted to know if a big hand could come down and scoop him up. And we had about a week left. And, the answer was no. No. But that's about it.
Okay. Let's talk about another project during this period. And you began working at Paul Newman's Hole-in-the-Wall Camp, and it's a summer camp for kids with serious illnesses. And I know that's very important to you. You're still involved with the camp today. And I wondered if you could tell us why that project is so important, and what did you do for the camp?
That was, when you talk about serendipity, one of the actors that I had known from Drinks Before Dinner, and who had become a friend, was directing the gala show. So Paul has over one period of 1 year, he developed this camp for these children. And they have a gala show. There's a wonderful little theater up there. It's in Ashford, Connecticut. And Jimmy called me and said, we need somebody to come design scenery. And, cardboard, Polly, just low-key. First I said no, because I had kids at home. And my ex, to give him credit, said, you should probably do that. So I went up, and you're sort of there for 5 days, and I concocted some things out of cardboard and was completely hooked. Because what they do is they had celebrities and Paul, but they also had 8 children on stage singing and dancing and telling their stories. And they were extraordinary. The stories of resilience and challenges. And in those days, well, when the camp started, 70% of the children who went to that camp did not see adulthood.
Mm-hmm.
And towards the end, I mean, lately it's more like 70% do. I mean, they've made incredible strides. And I was completely hooked. I couldn't imagine not doing that and helping them out again. So started doing the shows there. After about 4 or 5 years, they started asking me to do, they would have an anniversary show in, stage in New York. Mm-hmm. And they would ask me to do that. And then at one point they asked me to do a show out in California on the Dolby stage.
Wow.
And asked me to come to London and put one of the shows on there. So it certainly some amazing opportunities for me. But the camp is just extraordinary. They do such good work. And I had the good fortune to be about 4 years when Paul was around. Such an impressive man.
Yeah, tell me, what was your interaction like? Tell me more about Paul Newman.
He was pretty quiet, but he was around. I mean, he stayed. Everybody would gather at the camp for 5 days and put this show on, and it was almost like camp. It was like camp because we would all eat together.
He didn't just show up.
Nope, we ate together. There, were little parties. He was in the shows. He was around in the theater. Sometimes I would have something foolish that I would check to make sure it was okay, using an image of him or, I wanted to make sure he wasn't offended. And he didn't mind anything to raise money.
He was married to another icon.
And Joanne.
Yeah.
She's so impressive. I had the last big show I did. I don't know if there'll be another at Rose Hall for Lincoln Center. We did an homage, a show honoring Joanne, mm-hmm. which I was very happy to be part of.
Is it still as vibrant given the fact that Paul Newman is passed? Is it still as energized as ever?
It is. I wondered about that. And the shows don't have as many celebrities because certainly people wanted to come and be on stage with Paul.
Right.
But they've done a very good job of keeping up interest and excitement and, yeah.
Great. During this period, you also worked on other Broadway shows. You were very, very busy. That included Phantom of the Opera, The Lion King, and Spamalot. And we can't go through all of them, which I would like to do, but we don't have the time. If you think about the shows that you did during that time, what was the most rewarding and why does it stand out?
I was just talking to a friend of mine who I worked with at the time, and one of the shows I really enjoyed was Mary Poppins, mm-hmm. because Mary Poppins had scenery sort of from all over, and it needed to be pulled together on stage. So unusually, I was sent to the theater for a month to paint and tweak, and that's always, because we're not usually, the scenic artists, especially for Broadway, we're not usually there with actors and dance mm-hmm. going on and all of that. So that was great fun. I enjoyed that. Lion King was always entertaining. We were sent all over to all the shows need upkeep when they go on tour. So we would often get on a plane and go to Chicago and, fix things and repaint things. And so that was always interesting.
In the next phase of your career, around 2011, I know you work shifted more to movies and television, which is a very different world from live theater. Do you have a preference of the two worlds in your heart of hearts?
If I had to pick from all the things I've done,
mm-hmm.
probably the most fun I had was in Ian Sprott's shop.
Mm-hmm.
I had my own desk,
mm-hmm.
And the projects were usually smaller than a box. They were sort of tabletop or not huge. And they were inventive, and there were mechanics, and there were puzzles to solve. So honestly, if I had to choose one thing to do, that's where I would go. But I did enjoyed running things a little bit. I enjoyed supervising and pulling out, something would happen, and after 40 years, someone would say, I'm not really sure how to do this. And I could pull a technique out of my back pocket and say, well, maybe you could try this. Or
It sounds as though you could be successful in all these different worlds because you've done so much.
Yes.
And that range of talent has allowed you to succeed in these various areas.
Yes. And in Hollywood days, people would paint backdrops, and that's all they did for 25 years. I don't know that I'd like that.
Right.
I like hopping around. I like wearing different hats.
A little bit of the liberal arts education in you.
There you
do
go.
Different things.
There you go.
Now, you just mentioned the marvelous Miss Maisel, and I know that you enjoyed that work, obviously, and it ran for 5 seasons, I believe, and fairly recently ended in 2022, I believe. And it seems as though it brought together all your various experiences that you had during your life, and that's one of the reasons you enjoyed it, because you could be in a foreman's role and look at everything.
Yeah, and it used a lot of I sculpted. There were things to sculpt. In the 4th season, there was a theater that we built that was a burlesque theater. So there were funny burlesque scenery and costumes to do. I mean, I went back to doing foolishness, which I love.
Foolishness is fun.
Yeah, it's fun. And we did some backdrops for that. We did 6 backdrops on Maisel, which is unheard of, really, for a TV show to have backdrops you have to do. I don't know if you watched that nightclub scene.
You can describe it for our listeners. It's amazing.
It's kind of amazing. We were given 6 sculptures to do of about 8 feet tall, in a rush, of course. And I and another person, we started in on those. And as I was working, the sound man happened by, and he said, you know what this is? And I had read the script. I knew it was a nightclub scene. I knew it was you had bamboo. I knew all of that. He said, there was a film crew that went down to Cuba in 1960. I forget what the date is, 1960, and filmed there. And this has just come back to light, this film footage. And one of them was an amazing song in a nightclub. And Maisel pretty much copied that. Yeah. And it's quite wonderful.
Yeah, you sent me the link on YouTube so you can see the original footage from the original movie and how it was adapted for Maisel. And it's very interesting to contrast the two. That's what's nice about working on a TV show, where you do have a connection with the other people in the other departments, because somebody can clue you into that. Right. Which was great fun. But you really enjoyed that experience. And were you sorry when it ended, Maisel?
No, not really. I was getting to the point where it was time to think about retiring, because it's really not clever to be doing 10-hour days and climbing scaffolds and running up and down ladders at a certain point. People do hurt themselves. Right. And the schedules are getting tougher and tougher. And it, just for our safety's sake, honestly, at our age, it's time to start stepping back. And so I was sorry to see it end, but I was not sorry for the schedule. I mean, one of the last locations I did on Maisel was a 17-hour day.
Wow.
That was hard.
Yeah. Now, I think you were a foreman on that?
Yes.
Okay. So the question I have for you is, you talked about mentors being incredibly important in your life, and I'm wondering, in your foreman or supervisory role, are you mentoring the next generation of artists and designers, or were you at the time?
I've done some of that. It's unfortunately on projects you don't have a lot of time to teach, but at the scene shop there would be young folk that I would counsel, because also people would be, we might have apprentices that were trying to take the exam to get in, and we could sit down and talk about that, or I could look at their samples. I did some of that. Yeah, I did as much as I could. But one of the things I did learn as foreman, too, was to step back, to not try to control everything.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a little bit of Eon's tutelage to you,
Right.
which is go take care of it, and I'll keep an eye on it.
Right.
But take the ball and run with it.
Because I'm the kind of person that always, maybe more like Tony, tried to make sure everything was right and control things. And so it was, as time went on, it was a good lesson to just sort of step back and let people do it their way.
So that's how people who mentored you, you took a little, as you said earlier, of each.
Yep.
And incorporated it into your own mentorship.
Yep. Yeah. No, I like to think that I know some people thought my advice was useful, and I did what I could to help people. A lot of it was helping people get into the union,
Right.
because the good projects were.
Did they have to take the same difficult test that you did?
No. And some of the people my age sort of, bemoan that, because it was hard.
And the pass-fail rate was really, really hard.
But you don't really have to paint drops as much. I mean, our exam was to prove that anything we were assigned to do, we could do, which is paint a complicated backdrop or, do whatever. That's not really true now. Very few people paint backdrops. Mm-hmm. There are people that do it, and it's still being done, but it's less that. And even less sign writing and textures. It's more colors and textures and things like that.
Yeah. Since we're looking at the industry, and it's changing.
Yes.
You just had the writer's stroke. We had COVID and the impact of AI. So are you concerned, looking back, for the future of those who perform your kind of work today?
I think it's different. I would say 20 years ago, the scuttlebutt was, we're not going to paint drops anymore because they can be printed. But the truth is, it's not the same. A printed backdrop does not catch the light in the same way. That has taken a little bit over, but people still paint backdrops because they light beautifully.
Right.
And I think there's always going to be a place for the artist, even if it's using a computer. I think an artist's eye is really important in creating computer graphics, and that the machine doesn't do it, and AI is not going to do it. Mm-hmm. It's the sort of creative pathways. So it's not going to look the same. The scenic world is not going to look the same, and people are not going to have that drop painting skill. I mean, there's a whole process in painting a 30 by 60 foot drop that a lot of people don't know anymore.
Right.
But
do you feel something's been lost? And I know you don't want to say, I'm the old guard, and this is
Right.
the way you should have done it. We got to have a future. But has something been compromised or lost?
I tell you the truth, I think that for me, the hardest part is when I first started, the pace was slower. And you really had the time to do the extra, whether it was painting in the shop or movies. You had the time to make it really good. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what's getting lost, is the schedule is getting so tight that a decent job is good enough.
Right.
That excellence is a little bit, that's what's going away.
Right.
Because you're not being allowed the time to be excellent. And I think if I have a regret, that's probably the biggest one.
Right.
Because I think people still have pretty good skills.
You're in retirement or semi-retirement mode and the advice mode, perhaps. So I'm wondering, if you had been the commencement speaker, like Tim mentioned, at Williams this past year, I'm wondering what advice you would have had for young people, particularly those entering creative fields, because that's so in flux right now. So what would you tell the next generation, not only in your field, but generally those who are looking for the next phase of their life, like a Williams graduate? What would you tell them to do now, especially if they want to be creative and be in a creative field?
I guess I would say I think you can still find it. You do need to be flexible. And that's a tough one. That's a tough one.
Be open to serendipity.
Be open to the serendipity. Find. I mean, for instance, I'm now in Portland, and it occurs to me that I may wander over the shop that created all the puppets and backgrounds for Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio. Is in Portland.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah.
So I may wander over there.
Knock on the door.
Because those people are still creating and painting, and there still is artistry. People still do stop motion.
So you just alluded to this, a door you're going to knock on, but I'm wondering... Perhaps. So what is next for you?
I don't know. I have to figure that out. I did go to Portland and build a small house.
To be next to your daughter.
Which it was more fun than I thought. That was actually great fun. I enjoyed that thoroughly, with the help of an architect. But he was probably not happy that I could make drawings. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, okay. You had your 2 cents in this design.
Oh, absolutely. I drafted up things and sent them off and said, this is how I want this to look. And even wood-grained pieces of the exterior of my house to match something else. And they kind of look at me and say, really? I said, yep, that's what I want to do.
Other than that, is there anything in your house which would indicate what you did for your whole life professionally? Anything that if I walked into this new house, I would say, yes, there's something I can see.
In my studio, I have high shelves with my theater models.
Okay, that's cool.
So you would see them kind of arrayed around the room because, we still make scale models. I mean, I still do that for the Newman shows. It's very useful. So that you would see that. It's probably mostly what you would see. Other things are tucked away.
Right.
Other things are tucked away.
Well, we are about to have our 50th reunion next year. In a year from now, approximately. What are you looking forward to in terms of that reunion?
I think we're all calmer. Yeah. I think we have less to prove. We've had our lives and done what we needed to do and, enjoyed successes and failures, and everybody's more relaxed.
Right.
I think. And that makes it more fun.
Yeah.
To connect with people that you didn't see a lot of when you were there.
Yeah.
So I look forward to that.
A little bit like this interview.
Yeah, I look forward. Right, we didn't really know each other.
Right.
I look forward to catching up, and as I say, I think we're all a little calmer.
Yeah. Any closing thoughts?
I don't think so. I've been very lucky. I really have. I can't. This interview has given me a chance to sort of revisit all sorts of projects, and I'm amazed, and I look at them and I think, goodness, I've forgotten I did that, or remembering the show, or remembering the people I worked with.
Yeah, that's one of the values that I've found in this exercise of a Williams life. People have taken the time to reflect upon their lives and
right.
and think it through a little bit, and I think that's helpful.
Yeah, and to recognize, what a privilege it's been really to work in the business and to have such opportunities, and to, I have no complaints.
Polly, I can't thank you enough for joining us today. I really, really enjoyed our conversation. For our listeners, you can view photos of Polly's work by visiting 75creates.com, where you'll also find links to earlier episodes of A Williams Life. Thank you all for listening. Until next time, this is Gordon Earl, hoping you're enjoying your final summer before our 50th reunion in June of next year.